tough year. We feel for them, I guess. We're going to do the story in just a minute. Thanks for being with us. This is The Story. I'm Dan Haggerty. We want to hear from you. So all the things that are on your mind, that you're thinking about our coverage, what needs to be covered, let us know. Use that hashtag HeyDan or send us an email at thestory@kgw.com. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram, all kind of stuff. Don't hesitate. Let me know what you're thinking. Meantime, why don't we get to the big story? And this one is about a big fire, the largest wildfire in the United States right now, the Bootleg fire burning in southern Oregon. Impossible to ignore, not just for those of us living in the same state as this monstrosity, but for people living across the country. This has become a national story. It is impacting a lot of people. The New York Times, for instance, has this great map showing how the smoke from the Bootleg fire and other fires burning in the West has traveled all across the country. Smoke all over the Great Plains, the Midwest, even out into the East Coast. It's because of the jet stream there carrying the smoke across the entire continent. We can see, though, we're finally getting a break here, aren't we? Western Oregon and Western Washington, right for now, seems to be smoke-free because of the way the wind has been blowing. But we know what it feels like, all right? The folks out east, when we had our hazy skies the last summer, it was crazy. Well, that's what it looks like now in the rest of the country. And we all know from experience that stuff is not great to breathe in. So you can see why this has become such a big story right now, since it's impacting people thousands of miles away. But it is, of course, even bigger of an impact of those living right near where it's burning. Maggie Vespa is in southern Oregon right now, and I talked to her earlier about her experience, what she's seen so far during this fire reporting. Okay, let's check in with Maggie Vespa. Maggie, first of all, just wanted to know what it's like trying to report down there. I know that it's kind of difficult for reporters to get access to some of these fires.
Yeah, definitely. We're here in Bly, by the way, at the ranger station just along the highway. And just for reference, we're about 5 miles south of the fire line right now. It's been moving north and northeast, as we know. Oregon law requires that reporters be escorted to the fire lines by firefighters if they go at all. And getting access to this fire, the bigger it's getting, and frankly, the bigger a story it becomes, is getting more difficult, because we essentially have to get a reservation to get escorted by these firefighters who essentially do that job, who bring media in. And now we have the entire country paying attention to this fire. I was told, CNN, national networks are coming in, national publications and newspapers are coming in, and they want to see this fire. So the reservations filled up really quickly. We're trying to get to the front lines tomorrow or Friday to see this fire up close. But for now, we're still a little ways away. That said, the smoke is everywhere. So, it doesn't feel far.
So what do people need to know about this fire right now? I mean, not only just the people kind of living closer to where the fire line is, but folks in the more populated areas kind of up here around Portland. What should we all be paying attention to?
Yeah, so this fire has moved away from the more populated areas down here in southern Oregon, places like Bly, where we've been talking to people. And that is good news just for the immediate fear that, the raging fire is upon them. That's not the case anymore. That said, I just kind of want to show you guys some video. We talked to a family who lives near Bly, and they showed us, hey, the firefighters had to move on with the fire, and we get it because they're overwhelmed by the size of this. But hot spots are still springing up on our property, and this father and son were out with their hose spraying down hot spots themselves, and very afraid that a new fire could spring up and trees could burn on their property. So that's number one. Like, the fire's moved away from these people, but they're still nervous, understandably. Number two is just for people who are living far away from the fire footprint right now. The size of this is really jarring, especially this early in the season. This is now, as of midday Wednesday, the fourth largest fire in Oregon's history, roughly 400,000 acres. It's quickly closing in on being the third largest fire in Oregon's history. And it's really early in the season for that to be happening. This is July. And firefighters today multiple times kept saying, we usually think of this as being like a brief window in August when it's been this dry and this hot for this long, that the risk is this high. And so for them, they said, this feels a month early. And we've talked before about the fire season is just getting perpetually longer. So it's just, there are a lot of things that stand out about this, for sure.
I think about the first responders a lot in these situations. I know a lot of people do, but it's just such difficult work. The fire is burning day and night, and it always needs to be tended to. So given the conversations we've had about these firefighters, about, how much they get paid and the morale that they are dealing with and the overwhelming nature of the magnitude of this fire, what have you heard from the crews down there?
Yeah, the firefighters have been really generous with their time. I mean, they're exhausted. They're working 16-hour days every day. That being said, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibilities or just outside the realm of logic that they're not being that transparent with their frustrations with TV crews. When we get to talk to a firefighter, it's arranged by a public relations officer who is also a firefighter, someone with that expertise. And so I asked them, I said, I don't want to put this in your head, but aren't you just exhausted? Like thinking about how big this is, how early it is, aren't you just exhausted? And they said, yeah, everybody's exhausted, but this is what we prepare for, and this is the work that we do, and it's what we love, and it's in a way exhilarating, and we know there's a purpose here. And so they were really, the ones that we've spoken to have been very stoic and very professional about it. But we've all seen kind of the headlines and the conversations that have been coming out of this group, and it would be understandable given the conditions that they're in if frustration was mounting and exhaustion was mounting too.
It takes a special type of person to do that work, and we're glad they're down there working for us. So, Maggie, thanks for keeping us updated. We'll check back in with you sometime soon.
Sure.
Now, speaking of those firefighters, stay with me for a second. I want to say a couple things about them that cannot be argued. Okay, there's no argument to this. Save the hashtag #HeyDans. You can't argue this. First, firefighters are essential. They are a must-have profession. I mean, if we started a brand new society today, I'd say, okay, where do we start? We need a farmer, we need a doctor, we need a firefighter, we need a news anchor. They're in my top 4. We need them. My second indisputable fact about firefighters is they save things like lives, for instance, and our stuff and money. Third, their job is a dangerous job. It can be a deadly job. When something goes wrong at their job, when a mistake is made, they could die. I mean, people have died. So all of that said, how much do you think they make for a living? What are we paying them?
Right now, the entry-level firefighter is making $13.45 an hour, and we really want to bring that to the public's attention that a lot of the firefighters that you see out there on the fire line are increasingly finding themselves in hazardous situations, yet are being paid very oppressive wages.
Okay, that's a union rep doing an interview with one of our producers, trying to fight for some more money, which makes sense. Okay, they make, what'd you say, less than $14 an hour to fight life-threatening, fast-moving, unpredictable fires that have proven to wipe out entire towns. Now, for reference here, earlier today I found this open job posted online for a gig at Burgerville in St. Helens that pays more than that. Much more, actually, if you are on the higher end, the $16.50 end of that salary offer. Now, no offense to Burgerville, okay, but you get my point. I mean, no one's ever been like, oh my God, there's an emergency, the whole town's in danger, please send Burgerville. So right now, an entry-level firefighter on the front lines makes $13.45 an hour. If you translate that into a yearly salary, it's about $28,000 a year. They want a raise of 50%, which takes them to about $21 an hour, which would be around $42,000 a year, which is better, I guess, but still, it's a stretch if you're trying to own a home on the West Coast and have a family, raise kids, afford childcare, all that kind of stuff. And lawmakers get that kind of. President Biden recently raised the federal pay to fight wildfires, which may help. He bumped the minimum wage up to $15 an hour, which is, I guess, more competitive with Burgerville. It's a start. But the fact is, we simply don't have enough people going into this line of work right now. And surprisingly, $15 an hour to risk your life isn't getting it done. There is a staffing shortage, and if you haven't noticed, we don't seem to have a fire shortage.
And right now we're in what we call planning level 5. And what that means is that resources are stretched so incredibly thin that nationally we have to prioritize where those scarce resources go. And that's almost unheard of for July. In a normal fire season, we start seeing scarcity show up in August. But this year and last year, there's a tremendous strain on the system to get the resources that we really need at a local, state level.
Probably picking up on a trend during this coverage. The fire season's getting longer. There are more fires. At the end of the day, the math is pretty simple. If you have more fires, you need more people to fight those fires. That math is easy. Now, the salary math, admittingly, is a little more difficult. So let me know what you think. How much should the firefighters on the front lines get paid to start out? Email us at thestory@kgw.com or send me a tweet with the hashtag HeyDan. Now, we did get a bit of good news from the fire lines we want to tell you about. Crews were able to save the Mitchell Monument near the town of Bly. Now, if you haven't heard about this before, it is really interesting. The monument marks the only place in the continental U.S. where people were killed by enemy action during World War II. And yes, it happened here in Oregon. We found an old clipping of a news story in the Klamath Falls Herald and News, ironically published the same day the Nazis surrendered in May 1945. A local pastor named Archie Mitchell and his pregnant wife, Elsie, they took 5 Sunday school kids into the forest for a picnic and a fishing trip. On the ground, that group found a deflated Japanese balloon bomb right by the side of the road. These were those basically unmanned hot air balloons. They were filled with explosives that Japan had sent across the Pacific during the war. One of the kids touched the balloon and it exploded, killing all 5 kids and Elsie. Archie survived because he was still parking the car. Other balloon bombs did make it to the U.S., but that is the only one that killed anyone. A monument at that site was built in 1950, and right now it is inside the fire perimeter. But crews say that they put a protective wrap over the monument and what's known as the shrapnel tree nearby. It's a tree that still has scars from the bomb blast. They also got rid of a lot of nearby brush so it won't burn, and they dropped a bunch of fire retardant on the area from the sky. So thankfully, this piece of history is safe. Now, I want to talk about some of the other monuments that have been in the news over the past year or so. You may be a little bit more familiar with these. See, last year, I'm sure you remember, protesters tore down 3 statues of U.S. presidents in Portland. And since then, I've been wondering, I'm sure a lot of you have been wondering, where did they go? Where did they end up? Well, Christelle Kumwe looked into it for us.
In the midst of last year's nationwide reckoning for racial justice, protesters in Portland physically removed 3 statues of former presidents, Washington, Lincoln, and Roosevelt. After all these months, where are they and will they ever return?
Those statues are all in storage. We have been in a process of assessing them to understand exactly what the damage was.
Kristen Calhoun is with the Regional Arts and Culture Council, a nonprofit which works with the City of Portland and Multnomah County. The council collects and takes care of government-owned artworks, including statues. Last year's racial justice protests prompted the RACC to update the policy for removing artwork.
And what we realized when we were looking at the policy, again, last summer, was we didn't have anything in those policies that contemplated a moment like this.
The updated policy notes artwork significantly at odds with values of anti-racism, equity, and inclusion can be removed.
So we felt like we needed to do that, get that in the policy, and then go into the review process.
That process involves looking at factors like cost, damage, and location to determine if the statues should be returned. For example, the George Washington statue was on what became private land, and the current owner doesn't want it. The executive director of the Oregon Historical Society says the values and policies of the presidents come into question.
Washington, one of the wealthiest plantation owners of his time, was a slave owner.
Carrie Timchuk says even though Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he did not regard African Americans as equals.
At one point, his philosophy was that they should be colonized in Africa, sent to Liberia.
Roosevelt also didn't view black people as equals.
Nor did he regard the Native Americans, indigenous people, as equal. Same thing with citizens of the Philippines and Cuba and from Latino background and Asian American background.
Who is represented in work and who is not represented? How has history been captured? How do the public spaces reflect that?
The RACC will decide which statues, if any, should stay and will send those recommendations to the City of Portland.
That doesn't necessarily mean that the city will deaccession everything, but we'll go through the process. And that process will have community engagement in it.
Conversations will be centered in communities that have not historically been represented in public spaces. The review process is going on right now.
And wanting to make sure that our public spaces are representative and welcoming to all our community, not just some of our community.
It's uncertain how long it will take for a decision. Until then, the 3 statues will stay in storage. Christian Kumwe, KGW News.
I know no one wants to hear this, but COVID cases are ticking back up. So what are the chances the restrictions will come back too?
For people that are fully vaccinated, would you advise them to wear masks indoors?
That's a really good question.
Meantime, we've got another walkout on our hands, but it's not Republicans in Oregon this time. It's Democrats in Texas. When the story continues. All right, hello, welcome back. As always, I was looking through some of your questions and comments, things you had to say to me or to the show during the break. Keep them coming. Use that hashtag HeyDan. I also want to remind you about our Hey Help campaign. This week, we're asking you to please consider donating to the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes. They help more than 1,900 kids and adults participate in sports and other physical activity. And if you'd like to donate and help what they're doing, please open up the camera on your phone, point it at the QR code on your screen, or you can go to kgw.com/heyhelp. This is a micro donation drive, so feel free to give any amount of money, no matter how small, it will work and help. Now, we haven't really talked about COVID cases in quite a while. We've been pretty laser focused on vaccines, who's getting vaccinated, who's not getting vaccinated, all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, cases in Oregon have started to tick back up over the past few weeks. And yes, mostly among unvaccinated people, mostly among unvaccinated people, because about 40% of people in the state still haven't gotten at least even a single dose. And I talked to Pat Dorse about what this could mean for all of us.
Okay, Pat, let's cut right to the chase here. With cases rising, people want to know, could we see restrictions go back in place? Could we see life as it's getting back to normal start to be the normal we've been used to for the past year when masks come back and things like that?
For the most part, the answer is no. The answer is also maybe yes, but only if there's isolated outbreaks that require some sort of severe lockdown type thing with masks or something like that. But I think that statewide, we're not going to see them. Yes, the numbers are up. They're not up nearly like they were in the spring or even in last November, where we had as many as 1,700 cases in one day. So it's worth thinking about. But at this point, anyway, we are not LA County. We're not going to have to go back to mandatory masks indoors.
So what kind of things are you going to be looking out for, or what are they looking out for, the health officials? I feel like based on what I'm reading, the Delta variant keeps coming up. Is this why we're seeing this uptick right now? Is it being blamed on the Delta variant?
Right. For the most part, yes. And people are not vaccinated. So there's pockets in different parts of the counties in our state and in all states. And when the variant gets in there, it's twice as fast as it's spreading as any of these other variants that we've seen, the British variant or others. So it is a big problem when it gets into unvaccinated populations, and that's why you're starting to see the numbers rise again. There's still a couple of the other variants, but it was a third, and now I think that the Delta is starting to crowd out those others, and a lot of people expect it's going to become the dominant one in not too distant future.
Got it. Pat Doris, as always, thank you.
That's my pleasure.
Now, let's talk about some vaccines. More than 2.52 million Oregonians have gotten at least their first dose, according to the CDC. So 60% of our total population, everybody, kids, adults, even though kids under 12 aren't eligible. I get that, I know, but I want to give you an idea of how many of our people in our total population are vaccinated against this virus. And there you have the numbers. Now, in Washington, more than 4.79 million people have gotten at least their first dose, according to the CDC. That works out to be about 63% of that state's population. Now, I want to get to an email I got from George lately. Hey, Dan, I'm hearing a lot about Texas House Democrats walking out this week. Is that similar to the story you reported about Oregon Senate Republicans walking out, or are they different types of walkouts? That's a good question, George. I'm glad you asked it. See, Democrats in Texas, they are using the same tactic that we've gotten pretty used to seeing from the Republicans in Oregon over the past few years. They walked out to deny a quorum, meaning the legislature doesn't have enough members to actually vote and pass bills. But the reason they're doing it is very different from the Oregon GOP's reason. More than 50 Democrats down in Texas, they left the state to block a restrictive voting rights bill that Republicans are trying to pass. It would add new voter ID requirements for mail-in ballots and some early voting options. This is actually the second time that they've walked out this year over voting rights. The Democrats flew to Washington, D.C. They've been meeting with some national leaders, including the Vice President, Kamala Harris. And it turns out they've got some unlikely support. Willamette Week has a story that we think is worth your time. They talked to Oregon Senate Republican leader Fred Girod, who says he actually supports Democrats in Texas using their walkout tactic. He told them, quote, regardless of whether we agree or disagree with the policy the Texas Democrats are protesting, the quorum requirement is a tool that minorities have for holding runaway government accountable. Republicans in Oregon have, of course, walked out multiple times, mostly over cap and trade. Democratic leaders in Oregon have been really critical of that tactic when the GOP has used it here. But Governor Kate Brown, her office, told Willamette Week the two situations are fundamentally different, in her opinion, because Democrats in Texas are standing up for the right to vote and democracy. You can check out the rest of the story on the Willamette Week website. That's those three W's. They get me every time. All right, keep sending in your questions, your comments, tongue twisters. Just make sure you use the hashtag HeyDan. I'm going to read a few when we finish the story next. Okay. Here we go. I'm still reading through some comments. In the meantime, while I peruse, take a look here at the QR code. We love enormous QR codes on this show. I'm not sure if you've noticed that before, but just go ahead and take the camera out, point it at that, and it'll give you a link to help subscribe you to our newsletter. And that's something that we know most people can't watch every single night, even though you can find us on YouTube and all those other places. And this gives you an opportunity to see like a big grouping of all the big stories that we have done throughout the week to kind of help you stay up to speed. We send it out once a week. It's a good way. People seem to like it. They give us good feedback on it. So Dan wrote in and said, Oprah started in news and moved to a talk show. I'm predicting your future, Dan, and suggesting it might be positive for you. To be Oprah? Sure. I'd take that. I had a couple on that, what was the Meghan Markle interview and stuff? I was like, I wanted to ask questions and get in there. I could do that, maybe. Oprah's pretty good. I don't know. Great piece on the statues, Zach said, but there's one glaring omission. Where's the elk? Actually got a lot of questions tonight about the elk statue that was, of course, taken down pretty early down by the courthouse in downtown Portland. It's been interesting because we've been actually asking about these statues for a long time, and we're not getting any information other than to say they're in storage. They won't give us any specifics. I'm imagining like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark when they're just like pushing the cart through that like huge warehouse and hiding the elk statue for top men. But we'll keep asking. Also, one last person was trying to say, hey, there's a difference between wildland firefighters, which are the people who are down fighting the fires right now, and firefighters in general. You are correct, saying that a lot of those people are seasonal workers. Some of them are seasonal workers. Most of them are not. But they do have extra people come in to help all the time who are trained in that type of firefighting. So they will kind of recruit when needed from areas up here in Portland and things like that. And the pay scale can differ. But as far as those wildland firefighters, the ones who fight our wildfires, that's what I was talking about with that salary. So, whew, a lot of talking at the end of the show. Luckily, that's my favorite thing to do. That's the story. See you back here tomorrow.